Hey folks, welcome back to the channel where we mix serious engineering with serious fun. Today we're talking about something that's making waves, literally and metaphorically, offshore wind farms. That's right, we're heading out to sea to check out how the engineering behind these massive ocean-bound power stations has evolved over the years. Grab your life jackets because it's about to get windy. So what exactly is an offshore wind farm? Well, imagine if your ceiling fan moved to the beach, packed up and decided to hang out in the middle of the ocean. Except instead of making your living room more bearable in the summer, these giant fans generate clean, renewable electricity to power your home. Now let's take a quick trip back in time. The idea of wind power is as old as your grandpa's dusty record collection. People have been harnessing wind energy for centuries, from ancient sailboats to windmills in the Dutch countryside. But the first actual offshore wind farm didn't pop up until 1991 in Denmark. That's right, Denmark, home of Lego, pastries, and apparently the world's first giant ocean fans. The Vindeby wind farm was made up of 11 turbines, each standing at about 35 meters tall. These things were cute compared to today's giants, but they were groundbreaking at the time. They produced a total of 5 megawatts of electricity, which back then was considered pretty impressive. In modern terms, that's like powering about 2,200 homes. So enough for a small town, but not quite enough to run your local mall's holiday lights. The idea was simple. Wind at sea is stronger and more consistent than on land. Why? Because there are no mountains, trees, or skyscrapers out there messing with it. It's just pure, unadulterated wind action. So engineers thought, why not put these wind turbines offshore where the wind is better and we have more space? And thus, the era of offshore wind began. As the 90s rolled into the 2000s, offshore wind farms grew bigger like a tech bros startup after hitting Series A funding. The turbines got taller, the blades got longer, and the electricity output started to increase. In 2002, Denmark struck again with Horns Rev, the first large-scale offshore wind farm in the world. This bad boy had 80 turbines generating a total of 160 megawatts, enough to power over 150,000 homes. Suddenly, offshore wind wasn't just a quirky Danish experiment, it was a serious player in the renewable energy game. So how do these offshore wind turbines work? I'm glad you asked. Picture a wind turbine as a giant mechanical sunflower. Its blades, often over 100 meters long, spin when hit by the wind. The spinning blades turn a rotor which is connected to a gearbox. That gearbox cranks up the speed and sends that rotational energy to a generator which then converts it into electricity. From there, cables running along the ocean floor take the electricity back to shore where it's fed into the grid and ends up powering your toaster. Voila! Wind power at its finest. But here's the engineering challenge. Sticking a giant spinning fan in the middle of the ocean is no walk in the park. These turbines have to withstand not just strong winds, but waves, saltwater corrosion, and the occasional curious dolphin. Oh, and don't forget, they're sitting on the sea floor, which can be hundreds of feet deep. So how do they stay standing? Well, in shallow waters, engineers typically use a monopile foundation. Think of it as a giant metal straw stuck into the seabed. The turbine sits on top of this pole, nice and sturdy. It's simple, cheap, and it works. But as offshore wind farms started moving farther out to sea, where the water is deeper than your average swimming pool, monopiles weren't going to cut it. That's when engineers got creative. Enter the jacket foundation, basically an underwater Eiffel Tower made of steel. These multi-legged structures are more stable in deeper waters and they can handle the intense ocean currents better than monopiles. But as offshore wind farms continue to push farther out into the deep blue, where depths can reach over 60 meters or about 200 feet for my fellow Americans, even jacket foundations are starting to struggle. So now engineers are working on floating wind turbines. That's right, floating. These things are like giant buoys with turbines on top. They're tethered to the seabed with thick cables, but they float on the water's surface. It's like putting a fan on a pool float, except this one powers cities. Floating wind turbines open up a whole new frontier for offshore wind because they can be placed in much deeper waters, where wind speeds are even faster. In 2017, the world's first floating wind farm, Hywind Scotland, was deployed. This floating farm consists of just 5 turbines, but it produces enough electricity to power 20,000 homes. Not bad for something that's bobbing around like a cork in the North Sea. So what's next for offshore wind farms? Let's talk scale. Right now, the biggest offshore wind farm in the world is Hornsea 2, off the coast of the UK. It has 165 turbines, each standing as tall as the Eiffel Tower and generating enough electricity to power over 1.4 million homes. That's like powering all of San Diego with just one wind farm. But it doesn't stop there. Engineers are already working on even larger turbines with blades as long as a football field. The idea is simple. Bigger turbines mean more electricity, and more electricity means a greener future. We're also seeing more floating farms in the works with plans to take advantage of deeper waters far from shore. Some companies are even exploring ways to combine floating wind turbines with wave energy converters so we can harness both wind and ocean waves at the same time. Double the renewable energy, double the fun. Now you might be wondering, what's the impact of all this? Well, let's break it down. First off, offshore wind farms are a key player in the fight against climate change. By generating electricity from wind, they help reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, which means less carbon dioxide pumped into the atmosphere. Offshore wind is expected to provide up to 20% of Europe's electricity by 2040, and it's growing fast in other regions like the US and Asia. Cleaner energy means cleaner air, healthier ecosystems, and fewer climate disasters. Second, offshore wind creates a ton of jobs. Building, installing, and maintaining these massive turbines requires a lot of manpower, and that's good news for coastal economies. By 2030, the global offshore wind industry is expected to support over 1 million jobs worldwide. Plus, once these farms are up and running, they provide stable long-term employment in operations and maintenance, so not only are we saving the planet, but we're creating high-tech jobs that pay well. Talk about a win-win. And lastly, offshore wind could seriously boost energy security. Unlike fossil fuels, which are subject to price fluctuations and supply chain disruptions, wind is free and it doesn't run out. By investing in offshore wind, countries can reduce their dependence on foreign oil and gas, which makes them less vulnerable to geopolitical tensions. In other words, offshore wind could make energy markets less volatile and more predictable. Plus, since the turbines are out at sea, they don't take up valuable land that could be used for other things like housing or agriculture. So what does the future of offshore wind look like? Well, we're going to see massive growth. Right now, there's about 50 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity installed worldwide. By 2030, that number could triple to over 150 gigawatts. And by 2050, we could be looking at 1,000 gigawatts or more. That's a lot of wind power. We're also going to see innovations like smart turbines, which can adjust their blades in real time to capture more energy, and floating solar panels that can be paired with offshore wind farms to create hybrid systems. The possibilities are endless. So to wrap things up, the engineering behind offshore wind farms has come a long way since those humble beginnings in Denmark. From monopiles to floating turbines, the technology is getting bigger, better, and more efficient. And the impact on society is going to be huge. Cleaner energy, more jobs, and a more secure energy future. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into offshore wind farms. If you learned something new today, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And remember, when it comes to renewable energy, the future is looking windy, and that's a good thing.